Who sent you?
Nobody. There was an accident down the road and... What's going on?
I like this guy. Kind of looks like my grandfather.
They're coming.
Who is? What the hell was that?
You have a gun?
What?
Please tell me you have a gun.
No, why would I?
That's always what he used to say to me too.
Take it!
Oh, I used to love these visits.
No, it's out there.
Where we played the
Listening?
werewolves are coming game. Oh, what a... Oop. Grandpa?
Yes, death has visited them all.
Yes. Okay, okay, Grandma. Go to bed now. No? You're just gonna stare at me? Okay, that's creepy. Resident Evil 8 is an interesting experiment, to say the least. Inheriting the first-person shooter, survival horror hybrid devised by its predecessor, the natural inclination when executing a sequel was undoubtedly to turn the volume up on a proven successful formula. And yet, if done improperly, any experiment can blow up in your face. Now, I'm not suggesting that Resident Evil 8 is a failure by any stretch. For all intents and purposes, it's another very solid addition to a franchise that seems to be enjoying its own personal gaming renaissance. That said, I think anyone with a solid grasp on what makes a great survival horror game can probably agree that there's a very specific formula to follow, and that something about Resi 8 just feels slightly off. It isn't obvious at first, because everything about it very much looks, smells, tastes like Resident Evil. And yet, this newest iteration just feels like something hasn't gone quite right in the lab.
This is the ultimate life form. Tyrant! Go to hell. Jill will join you too. What? Don't come this way! No!
The story of Resident Evil 8 goes strictly according to formula, at least for a while anyway. You have your protagonist, Ethan Winters, enjoying a normal life with his wife and daughter, only to be unceremoniously extracted from the rigors of fatherhood and thrown into the horrors of a town in the midst of a viral outbreak. Which is more horrifying, I'll let you fathers out there decide.
Dad,
Yes?
I'm hungry.
Well, you should have eaten your breakfast.
I think I'll take the village. Typical of any Resident Evil game, you fight monsters, explore macabre gothic horror environments, and solve oddly out-of-place puzzles that have no business having been installed. Don't... you prick. Oh. I hate this. I hate this puzzle. It's not even a puzzle. It's just like pull the levers at exactly the right moment to get across. It's so dumb. That said, there are some welcome tweaks to the usual cast of viral-induced zombies and science experiments gone wrong. For the first time in the series, there's werewolves, vampires, fish, things, along with various other new freaks to blow away. And it really gives the game a great new wrinkle to work with and flesh out thematically. And speaking of fleshing something out, the characters have been given a decent overhaul. Mia and Chris featuring prominently as interesting sub-characters, and the various villains having their own backstories and different motivations. But Ethan is the obvious standout. In his first foray into Resident Evil, Ethan was more or less an avatar of the player, with the emotional range of a block of wood. Yeah, he had a backstory. Well, sort of. A man looking for his missing wife. But we really didn't get much more than that. And throughout the story, we didn't get, well, any character development from him, besides the occasional dull exclamation of alarm or short quip. It was one of my few issues I had with the game, and it's sure nice to see Ethan get an actual personality in the sequel. Now he's a doting father, a caring husband, and a man haunted by his past experiences in the Baker Mansion. He seems to have genuine emotions and feelings, getting particularly upset when he fails to save or protect someone. And even though he's not winning any Protagonist of the Year awards, because I think on the whole he was still meant to be a bit of a prop for the player, it still gives the character a more grounded and believable purpose in all the insanity he gets caught up in. The issue becomes, from a strictly storytelling perspective, they are really pushing the envelope on what a virus or plaga or megamyce, megacia, mega. What the mold can conceivably create. Good horror, whether it be in a video game, book, or movie, relies on the audience's ability to suspend their disbelief and make themselves buy into a concept. While there are various vague explanations riddled through the game as to how these creatures are being created, the vampire family in particular getting a somewhat plausible explanation, it all borders on the absurd how many different creatures the mold can spawn. Now, granted, this is a Resident Evil we're talking about here. A franchise where everything was simply and brilliantly explained by a virus and some bogus science mumbo-jumbo in the first few games. Also, horror as a genre always benefits from a less is more approach to exposition, so this is a nitpick at best. But even still, I find myself really doing my damnedest to suspend my disbelief here, which unfortunately becomes a recurring theme throughout. Resident Evil 8 never quite jumps the shark, but it sure does come close, in an attempt to keep this review relatively spoiler-free. Let's just say there's several points in the story where it sure balances on a knife edge of either being believable or ridiculous. Characters sometimes do things that seem a bit staged or illogical considering the situation. I'm looking at you here, Chris.
What's moving?
Unknown, but my guess is we've been here too long and Miranda knows it.
Hey, did you say Miranda? How are you involved?
Leave it alone, Ethan. You are out of your depth.
Why?
What do you mean why? 'Cause you can't.
Why?
Because you just can't, okay? Trust me on this.
And it's a real shame, because these are small issues that I really feel could have been ironed out with one or two more edits of the script. Also, we've got to talk about the pacing, which is very solid up to a certain point, but makes a drastic detour late game that threatens to seriously derail the momentum the story has been building. I'll talk more about this moment in the gameplay section, but without giving anything away, it seems to me that a lot of extra content was jammed into the later half of the game, which really could have been edited out or toned down just a hair. It's like right about here where this level starts to get... Yeah, exactly, Ethan. I really think that, contrary to the critics out there bemoaning that games these days are, quote, too short, unquote, this game could have really benefited from a leaner, better executed plot, especially, like I already mentioned, in its later half. Okay, let's take off our snobby, quote, game journalists, unquote, hats for a moment and cut Resi 8's story some slack. On the whole, it's a well-written, competently executed piece of storytelling, the believable characters and voice acting having a real stabilizing effect on a plot which might otherwise get carried away with itself. As with the last few remakes and Resi 7, the franchise has clearly left its campy B-movie acting and dialogue in the past in favor of phenomenal, understated writing combined with impactful performances. And ultimately, this ain't Shakespeare, folks. And I think the vast majority of Resident Evil fans, myself included, understand that and love the franchise all the more for it.
I want to see.
You mean...
He's away.
Both of you shut the fuck up!
What? Where?
You mean you'll screw around with him in private, and where's the fun in that? Give him to me, and I'll put on a show that everybody can enjoy.
Amazing. Enough said. Wait. You guys are expecting something a bit more insightful from old Raskolnikov? Fine. Though it pains me, I'll do my best to point out the obvious. Resident Evil has always been on the leading edge of video game artistry, but hot damn, ever since Resident Evil 7 and the game engine that it spawned, the franchise has never looked better. Hell, video games have never looked better. I personally think these games look better than their CGI movie counterparts, with characters being highly detailed and their facial expressions and reactions being natural in the extreme. The environments are also stunning, the village and the vampire castle in particular being standouts, with a baffling amount of detail packed into cleverly laid out level designs. Also, there's this. Hello. Three daughters.
Man blood.
Yes, good. I'm going to see the daughters. Gotta admit,
Mother,
I'm not hating this.
you are so kind to me, daughters. Now, let's take a look at him. Wow.
Yeah, like I said, enough said.
You escaped my little...
Alright, now to put that pretentious journalism hat back on, let's talk about the gameplay, with a real focus on something I'd like to call voice. And I don't mean the voice acting here, folks. What I mean is, what's this game's personality or character? But to do this properly, we're going to have to take a trip back to the conception of Resident Evil 7. Resident Evil 7 was a revolution in the survival horror genre. Much like how Resi 4 changed the horror landscape by putting the camera over the shoulder, Resi 7 changed things by eliminating the camera altogether. Changing a franchise that had always been a restrictive, third-person experience and making it an inclusive, first-person trip altered the core elements of Resident Evil in several different ways, some good and some admittedly bad. What it undoubtedly accomplished, though, was reinventing the horror elements of the franchise. Now, you, the player, weren't just watching the survival horror experience, you were surviving it. This change in philosophy can't be understated, and it was a drastic paradigm shift, not just for Resident Evil, but for the genre as a whole. Now, granted, I'm sure some other obscure game probably did it first, but Resident Evil 7 brought it to the mainstream, and all told, I think the positive effects outweigh any negatives. Now, you might be asking, Raskolnikov, you dastardly purveyor of Resident Evil lore, why are we spending so much time on Resi 7? Bear with me here, folks, because one thing Resi 7 does exceptionally well is it never tries to be something it's not. Even though it's a first-person game, with a lot of shooting by the way, it still plays like a survival horror. The action is clunky and awkward, and your movements slow and cumbersome. You're very much an ordinary guy trying to live through an extraordinary experience. But the game compensates by making sure the enemies never present you with too great a hurdle to tackle gameplay-wise. For the most part, you're dealing with no more than one or maybe two monsters at a time, and the combat is more focused on item management and tactics rather than quick reflexes and rapid-fire action. All this only adds to the realism of any horror game, and for the most part, Resi 8 follows the same mindset. That is until a certain someone shows up. I won't name names.
No more following. Just stay with me, kid.
That's my plan, sir.
The tone of the game takes a radical shift, suddenly feeling more like a first-person action game, like some Call of Duty game with werewolves instead of Nazis to shoot. That might be fine for some folks, but here's Raskolnikov's problem. The actual gameplay never changes gears into action shooter mode, yet the game ups the ante all the same. It's the equivalent of sipping on a nice, hearty ale at your local pub, thinking you know what kind of night you're in for, then suddenly having a triple shot of bourbon poured down your throat. Oh, and then being expected to actually survive a zombie apocalypse.
But you should be safe inside here. I'm keeping a close eye on things.
It's a really odd change of pace for a game that's more or less stuck to the Resi 7 formula up to that point. It almost feels like the sequence in question was a mercenary-style minigame or something that the director liked so much he just included in the final cut. For the life of me, I can't imagine why. It doesn't add anything meaningful to the plot that a simple 5-minute cutscene couldn't handle. It really screws with the pacing, not just for a gameplay point of view, but from a story point of view as well. Phew. Okay, wow. I sure took a long walk around the bush to make my point there, didn't I, kids? So let's scale that all back a bit by saying, for the most part, the game plays exceptionally well for what it's trying to accomplish anyway. And the problems I've just discussed are a strange sidebar to an otherwise solid experience. Enemy variation, something that was sorely lacking in Resi 7, is a nice touch here, with the aforementioned werewolves, zombies, vampires, and other monsters, each having their own unique attacks and their own unique means of putting them out of their misery. The boss fights are well thought out, even if some of them are more memorable than others. They each have their own gimmick to change up the strategy necessary to defeat them. The weapons are varied and all feel pretty realistic, and the UI and menus never feel awkward or inhibiting to the experience. All told, it's still very much a solid, playable game with a few minor mistakes in the formula, which, although annoying, don't cause a complete breakdown in the experiment. Now, it's no secret at this point probably that I've been a lifelong fan of the franchise since I was just a wee lad. And I'm really glad they're still producing these types of high quality games, and at an impressive rate, mind you. And yeah, though there are a few missteps with this latest iteration, it's still a worthy addition to a franchise that continues adding fulfilling products to its addicted consumers all around the world. Thanks, Umbrella. You know, I'm really not sure why there's so much mistrust of Big Pharma these days.
Holy shit!
Oh, yeah, right. Well, at least we don't have to put up with those cheesy one-liners anymore.
In death as he was in life. Disgusting.
Shut up, Ethan.